Welcome back. We are going to be creating a frequency distribution based on the survival length of the virus that was collected from researcher A. So what we are going to do is we're going to look at this table, and then we're going to use this table to organize our results, and then we will graph based on that table. So we need to look at the 40 values for researcher A, which are going to help us put our categories together. Okay, I copied down the values from researcher A, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put tick marks in the frequency column as I go through the data. So I'm going to organize where these values live. The first value is 3. That goes in the 0 to 6.5 link. The next one is 4. The next one is 11. So what I encourage you to do is pause the video and fill out the chart yourself and then come back and see if we agree. Okay, I'm all finished. Relative frequency compared to frequency itself. Frequency is just talking about the raw counts, how many actually exist in those categories. And so I use tick marks it's 4 lines and then a line through it to refer to 5. So I'm going to put the numbers next to it of how many were in each of those groups. I had 2, 5, 9, 5, 7, 7, 2, and 3. And when you add those up, they should add to 40 because we had 40 values. All right. In order to calculate the relative frequency, what we need to do is divide each value by the total that there is. So there are 40. So I had 2 out of 40, and I'm going to turn that into a decimal. So each of these I'm going to divide out and turn it into a decimal. For our class, I prefer us to use 3 numbers behind the decimal. So that's how I will be rounding. If I take 2 divided by 40, I'm going to write that as 0.05 or 5/100ths. 2 over 40 is one way to write the proportion relative frequency. I can also write it as 0.05 or 5/100ths. 5 over 40 is 125 thousandths or 0.125. 9 over 40 is 225 thousandths or 0.225. We already know what 5 over 40 is. 7 over 40 is 175 thousandths or 0.175. 2 over 40 we already have. And finally, 3 over 40. That is 75 thousandths or 0.075. Cumulative relative frequency is where you are adding each value until you get to a total. So you start out with 2 out of 40, and then you add the next set, and then the next set, and the next set, and so on until you get down to the end. Now there were 40 total, so at the end we should have 40 out of 40 or 100% of our values. That looks like 2 over 40 plus 5 over 40. That's going to give me 7 over 40 or 0.175. Then I add the next group. So 9 plus 7 is 16 out of 40, which is 0.4. So if you add 9, the 0.225 plus 0.125 plus 0.05, you will get to 40. So it is those 3 pieces combined. You will get to 0.40. Adding 5, I get 21 out of 40. Or 525 thousandths. Adding another 7 gives me 28 out of 40. Or 7/10ths. Another 7 gives me 35 out of 40. 875 thousandths. Adding 2 more gives me 37 out of 40, or 925 thousandths. And then adding 3 more, I should get to 40 out of 40 and 0.1.0, or 1. I can graph with this information. I can create a relative frequency graph, and I can also create a cumulative relative frequency graph using the decimals or the fractions or the frequency. So if I was to create a frequency chart on the left-hand side axis, I would have the numbers 1 to 10. If I was doing a relative frequency chart, I would be using the decimal equivalents going from 0 to about 0.25. And if I was doing a cumulative relative frequency chart, I would be going from 0 to 1. And the cumulative relative frequency chart is going to continue to get higher and higher and higher because you're adding to the previous values. Whereas the frequency chart and the relative frequency chart should look identical. It's just that the left-hand side is different, whether you're using relative versus raw frequency. That is the only difference. So let us graph this. Okay. I have labeled my graph to say survival of virus in days, and I've labeled the days on the x-axis horizontally. And then I did relative frequency and frequency. So relative frequency is the decimals. I went by 0.025. Frequency, I went by 1. So the first category was 2 out of 40, or 0.05. So I make a line, a bar at 0.05, and then I drop down, as that is the group from 0 to 6.5. days of survival. Notice that 2 over 40 was the same as 0.05. So the relative and the raw are the same. The next group was 5 out of 40. The next group was 9 out of 40. And then 5 out of 40 again. And then 7 out of 40. And then 7 out of 40 again. And then 2 out of 40. And then 3 out of 40. Each bar should be the same width, and the height of each increment should be the same so that your graph is accurately represented. So here we have created a raw frequency, if you're looking at the orange on the y-axis, and a relative frequency chart for our days of survival. Hope this was helpful.